Hi there, my name is Valerie Dayrit. I'm a sacred poet, channeler, and an author. Welcome to my dimensions of storytelling. Hello, beautiful consciousness. Today I am inspired to do a little bit of a different video. And what this video is about my life journey into becoming a poet, a channeler, and an author. And how did I ended up self-publishing 24 books in the end. And so this is my life journey that I want to share with you and hopefully to inspire those who are seeking themselves. And so how did it begin? To answer that question I would have to take you back into my childhood. My childhood played a extremely important play in this whole entire tapestry of where I am at the moment. My childhood taught me tools that helped guided me into where I am today. And what it is that as a child, I grew up in a village in the Philippines. And when you grow up in a village, you tend to grow up really, really fast. But not just that, what it does to you is that it builds your sense of awareness to your surroundings, because you are essentially a part of nature. And living in a village is very, very organic. And you are in touch with your senses at a pretty much almost at 100% of volume, because your senses are catered into this survival mode almost. And so your senses are tuned into keeping your state in safety. Because, well, where I grew up, it was quite an organic space. We lived by a river, and our house was situated by a rice field. And so also there was a mini forest around where my grandmother lives, which is about 15 minutes away from my family's house. And so I did grow up in an environment where my instincts, my intuition was built to cater to my surroundings. So when I say this, these are the most important tools that I learned when I was a child, because building my intuition to listen to my intuition, listening to my instinct, and that equaled into trusting myself. And so that is what my childhood built me into, because when 2011 happened, that was when my first awakening happened. And when that happened, my kundalini woke itself up. And at the same time, my ascended master started to communicate with me. And so when I had these two dimensions opening up simultaneously, it was quite a shock to my system. But there was always one thing that I was sure of, and that is my self-trust in me, that I built so profoundly and strong when I was a child, that this is what I survived on. And so I took that into this journey that I was on. And because I didn't have a teacher to teach me about what a kundalini awakening is, everything for me was instinctual. And everything was about listening to my intuition. And so when all of these transitions were happening, and intense shifts, and these places that I went to within myself, within the ether, and essentially to the worlds of gods, was quite frightening to the psyche. and to the brain, because the brain can only comprehend so much. And so it was a lot of teaching my brain to go just a little bit more further, to interact in my inner world, in the ether, and my curiosity to understand what else is beyond, more to where my soul was leading me into. And then, because of my curiosity, something deep happened, that I went into a deep state of amnesia almost, where I went into a blocked mode. My only understanding of that is that I must have gone to a place where I wasn't ready to go yet. And my whole entire system shut down. So for about a couple of years, I was in this limbo. And I wasn't meditating. I wasn't doing any kundalini connection. And my ascended masters as well, I shut them out. So completely shut down. Then 2016 happened. When that happened for me, that was when I made a conscious decision that it was time for me to do my work with my ascended masters. And so one day I simply says, I am ready. I am ready to listen to what they have to say. I am ready to do what it's necessary to do to understand who they are and who I am. And so I went through a drastic change where I was unplugged from the third world dimension and simply plugged into my inner world. And within that timeline, I did so much writing, so much downloads. My hands couldn't keep up, writing informations, writing stories, writing poetries. And I was traveling so deep into these worlds that there was something familiar about it. But my senses were shut down from it. So the more I went deeper and the more I allowed myself to understand what the unknown is, the more everything seems to become familiar. The smells, the roads, the stories. And at that same time, that was where I interacted deeply with my soul. And my soul expressed itself who he is. And then it started to take me into my different lifetimes, and it started to express to me that these were the lifetimes that I have been before. And so then it took me into this ride of understanding and witnessing all these storylines. And still there was like a huge space of fear in there, even though I was willing to do all the writing. There was still a huge space of resistance because I didn't want to believe that my soul says I am who I am. And when it gave me his name, it was quite a shock for me. And I didn't want to believe it. But what I was willing to do was to do the work, to do the writing, to do the traveling, and do the channeling work. And so then I went through this deep change of transformation, of self-remembrance, of walking the dark night of the soul. And I wrote about, I believe, 11 books in that state that just went on continuously. Then suddenly there was a moment where everything just stopped. This was a moment where my body had to heal. And this was, I believe, in 2019, just before spring. That was also when my body started to, or I should say, my energy had started to descend back into the third dimension, because my energy has been projected onto so many different dimensions. And I started to come back here to heal my body. And so that was that time that was quite a understanding what it feels like to be, what it's like to exist from my inner world and what it's like to exist outside my inner world. And during that time was also when I got to go and meet a very special being. So everything that I have been writing about in this love story of the poet seeking its beloved, I honestly thought it was just all stories that I was writing about. Then something magical happened. I met a being that the beloved embodied. And so that went into a complete different dimension altogether, because it felt like everything that I have been writing has come into this space where it became alive. And I thought I really was losing my mind, even though where I have been, I could also say I thought I was losing my mind. But when you become interactive in the physical space with everything that you have written, it's almost as if page by page they were coming alive and they were playing in front of me. And so that was a very beautiful way for me of understanding that life is full of this intricate weaved of different dimensions. And for me to understand in that moment that what is true is what you are experiencing. And that is something that I truly got to understand. And through that process, I got to embrace that this is my truth, that was my truth, that it's not my imagination. And that inspired me to write another 11 books from that point on, which ended up in total these 22 books that I published in one day. And so throughout my process, what I have learned is that life is so magical, and we are covered in that magical energy if we were to only tune in to those energies and use those energies into something that they're meant to be used for, rather than to use our energies into things that are not meant for. And so when you actually use your energies to manifest or create what the energy is wanting to create it for, and you are basically simply riding that wave and allowing the creativity to just create life on its own, and you're just there to be able to witness that as if you're just simply watching a flower bloom, and you're there to feel the flower bloom. And that's what, to me, what life is. And without judgment or without putting any of my energy in terms of resistance to resist the motions, but rather to simply be with the motions and let it teach you. So I went into that journey of one more time back into writing. And by this time, I started to become what I tell myself, I started to become a better writer. Because after writing, even though I've written about 11 books, there was still a huge gap in me, and that is self-doubt. And so once I started writing all these other 11 books, I just went on from one book after another book. I believe I wrote that within a period of 1 year. And every passage, it gained my own understanding of who I am and who my soul is. And I couldn't deny who my soul is, because I went through the process. I went through the schooling. My ascended masters told me who I am, and I resisted once they told me who I am. I resisted when my soul says I am who I am. And it's because it's all of these fear and blockages that we grew up from, societies and cultures that has integrated themselves into our psyche, and these became our foundations, but they are a danger to one's own growth when these false foundations starts to root themselves in there as if they are the actual things in there, when in reality, once I started to go through my awakening process and I started to break them down, they were there passed on from someone who didn't know any better, and I believed it because everyone else has believed it. So once I started to go through these walls that was taught to me from when I was a child, and once I went through the process of unlayering this lifetime, then I went on through other lifetimes and I started to again also do that same work. And the more I got to do it, the more I got to learn and became better at understanding what these resistance were, what these fears were. And most of those comes from other timelines. And for me, it became this journey of self-reflection, of truly understanding where the roots were coming from. And through the process of writing, they unloaded themselves and they showed their features to me. My shadow realms, I spent a lot of time within my shadow realms because I wanted to understand what encompasses my shadow realms. What were the nails? What were the screws? What were the walls? What were the floors? What were the ceilings? What were the bedrooms? The paintings, the textures, the air, everything that was in my shadow realms, I scraped it. I went in there and scraped it so that I could understand it and taste it and feel it and know it, because I wanted to know who I am. I wanted to know why my soul said I am who I am. And so through that process of my own curiosity, of these parts of myself where I dove into to understand, some of those parts of myself were so dark. Some of those parts of myself were in a deep state of trauma, not just from this lifetime, but other lifetimes. So then I spent time working on those traumas, and I brought them into the light so that they can be freed from those dimensions, so that I can finally be able to become that version of myself that I have always thought existed, that is just there from a touch, but I couldn't touch it. And so when I went through all that unlayering, all that unlearning, the amount of purging that I did, which I still do to this day because of what I do as a channeler. Every day I do purging because every day I do get a lot of downloads as well. So I purge. So all of this learning process of becoming a channeler, a writer, and essentially an author, I somehow in the end ended up publishing 24 books in total. But at the same time, this didn't come as a surprise to me, because in 2016, when that moment I told myself I was ready to face what I needed to face, that was also when my Ascended Masters gave me this whole vision of myself with my books. And it was literally like a matrix when they said, Valerie, this will be you in the future. And right in front of me was volumes of books just appeared just like that. And I thought to myself, that can't be true and that can't be right, because first of all, I didn't go to school for writing. And also, English isn't my first language. And so there was all this resistance that I was automatically giving to them as my excuses. And all I heard from them was laughter, these beautiful parent-like laughter. And they said to me, Valerie, all you have to do is to listen to what we are guiding you into. Listen to our words and just listen and write. That's all we need you to do. And within that time frame, we will teach you to become who you are. And because I also told them that public speaking isn't my greatest asset as well. And so I had so many fears, basically. And I had so many resistance that I gave it all to them. And in that space, they told me they will teach me everything that I needed to know. And so that was when I made a conscious decision, and I told myself, there's two choices in this matter, to do it or not to do it, and come up with one. And because my instinct is so strong and my trust within myself is so strong, I listened to my intuition and I told myself, if this was a bad space, I told myself the only way to know it is if I go through it, and I can always step out of it. But from the moment I made a conscious decision, it was just nothing but love from them, love from my soul, love from the beloved, and all these places that it took me within myself, within the ether, and within the realms of gods and the realms of Buddha and Buddhas, and reaching these dimensions that I never thought that I would ever reach. And that is where this journey took me. It took me into the lands of gods, and it's undescribable to express what that means. So I did the best I could, and I wrote about it. I wrote about my journeys, and that's what I did. And on that note, you can find my books on Amazon. Enjoy choosing a book and enjoy reading them. Thank you.